use it. It's a terrible problem in government. Number 6 recommendation, to get workers in government to train them and motivate them and enhance their skills. Number 7, to reform, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when I get into my third chamber, to look hard at campaign financing and the influence of campaign contributions and the moneyed interests of turf protectors in a way that makes it hard for people with a general caring view of their community to get into the governmental process. I personally want to focus on that a little bit more in a minute. And so we talk about financing, about political fundraising, and opening the books on campaign financing and bringing new ideas to bear for campaign finance contributions. We talk about citizen liaison offices and how citizens can be brought into and involved in the governmental process. And then number 10 is on health care, which ties into our report to be now released next week. Here, just weeks before the administration's plan. And the essence of our position on health care, I'll say a little bit more about that here, is that the federal government has got to make decisions or turn the power to make them over to the states and get out of the way. The states are moving in a lot of ways and have a lot of responsibilities for health policy, for insurance regulation, for licensure, for Medicaid, which is so troublesome, of course, to state and local finances because of the pressure it's put on state and county, in some places, budgets. So our paper on health talks about the missing dimension, which we really worry about. And that is, we talk a lot about what to do and not enough about how to do it. How are we going to manage and implement new dramatic changes in health policy for the country along the lines of what we know quite a lot about now from newspaper stories about what the administration is going to do? The implementation and federalism dimensions, the how do you do it and who does it part of American government is the short suit of American government. We have a wonderful, yeasty, hyper-pluralistic, Madisonian political system. Everybody spends so much energy and time talking about what to do that we don't put enough focus on how to do it and who's going to do it. So the theme of the work we're doing, and we have support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to study 10 states. What will those 10 states do under the Clinton plan? Our theme is implementation and federalism. How's it going to be done and who's going to do it? Is it realistic? Has it been thought through? Can it really happen? Is it just a promise? Now, I will take just a second for a commercial message here. That's particularly a theme I care about. And I wrote a book recently which has just been published called Turning Promises into Performance, about implementation, about this missing ingredient of thinking about how things get done. It's about leadership and about strategies for taking ideas and pushing them down into and penetrating governmental systems so that those ideas happen, which is critical to reducing the frustration people have with their governments and the, I think, particularly deep feeling in the country now that the government officials, they really talk down to us. They talk to us in sound bites. They don't really tell us things. People are upset with government, and I think part of the reason they're upset is that government deals with ideas, but not with carrying them out. And that is the thesis of this little book, which I mentioned, in my remarks, in my notes, which I'm not going to turn to as the third part of my talk. This reminds me of a sort of a quip. People, often, I think I once actually heard this. I'm not sure. It may just be a dream. In reference to a book I wrote, I heard two people talking. I just overheard. And one of them said, "Do you know a certain book that I'd written?" And I was just listening. They didn't know I was there. And the other person said, "Yes, but not personally." And so we know about books sometimes, but we don't, so many things to get into that often we don't know them personally. Now I want to talk about, in a third chamber, what is in these notes that I've written for you, the first 8 pages of these notes. And I'll just go through them quickly and propound a thesis which I'm trying out. I'm trying it out on you. This is not a speech. You'll see, like on a cigarette pack, there's a little box in the front of this paper. It says, "I wrote this paper as notes for a presentation." These are ideas that I'm working on that I want to share with my friends in the reinvention movement to get reactions. And the title of the remarks is "Bolder Strategies Are Needed for Reinventing Government." And let me put it right on the line. I think it's all well and good to talk about the executive and to talk about changing governmental practices, but in this period in which I believe and hope there's a new interest in changing and reforming governmental institutions, I want to propose to you that it's got to be deeper than just the executive. It's got to be deeper than just changes in procedures and agency operations. The thesis of these remarks is that we need to think also about constitutional change, and by that I mean structural and basic change. And the argument that I make here is a pretty simple one, that most of what we talk about when we talk about reinventing government is what executives do. There are two other parts of the story. What the courts do, which is not at all unimportant, as you well know, and what legislatures do. And I have been increasingly, in my own work and with colleagues at our institute in college, thinking about constitutional changes that would be fundamental in getting at the governmental culture that is what is really bugging people. A governmental culture of moneyed interests tied to intrusive, increasingly more involved legislative actors in a way that I think is reflected in the most profound change. We've talked about all the things that people are hyping up and doing TV spots on, like the Gore Commission, but what's really happening out there is term limitations. 15 states have amended their constitutions, including California, to limit terms for their legislatures and for the United States Congress. I believe that there's something very profound happening in the country, and I'm a member appointed by Governor Cuomo of our Constitutional Revision Commission in New York, headed by Peter Goldmark, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and we are wrestling with this, looking at our own governmental culture. The fact that government is so rigid, so change resistant, so much influenced by tight little connected interests of lobbyists and people who work in and focus in a very rigid way on their particular interests. Not that interests aren't important, but that the system has evolved in a way in which people who want to look generally at government and its mission, and people who want to see government change, how it deals with hard problems, have a very hard time doing so.